Test. Can you test? Just say
Test.
Okay, we're good now.
Okay.
You're still recording?
Still recording?
All right, we're good to go.
Okay, back on the podcast here, and this one's all about out-of-state relocation. So what we're going to do is I'm going to run through, this is very common, these things come up a lot. 100% of my clients don't live in the state, so tons and tons of context for this. And I want to talk about long-distance moves, out-of-state relocation, relocating to Florida, all this kind of stuff that comes up and the stressors and kind of how to do this logistically. The way we're going to roll this out, I think would be most helpful is we've gathered a ton of questions basically. So I have a lot of conversations per week with clients all the time, and it's very similar issues. So we've kind of aggregated the evergreen questions from both individual conversations, from YouTube, all these different facets. I've got 5 or 6 here, I think. I'm going to have Michael, who works with me on video, off camera here, is going to ask questions so that you can kind of think about them before we answer them. We're going to run through like that. I hope it is helpful. So let's just get rolling and get started with our first question.
Okay. Hello, everyone. First question, Adam. How do I decide on a particular area of Florida?
Okay, so I thought this was a good one to start off with because a lot of times people are stressing about stuff that isn't necessarily relevant yet when they're still kind of like, should I move to Tampa, or I'm looking at Tampa and St. Pete, or even like Venice versus Sarasota city limits. I think it's not really new construction versus resale and all this kind of stuff at this stage. It's really like macro level. Where do I want to live? How do I decide on that in 1 week's time when I'm visiting, or how do I decide on that over a couple months? And then, separate logistics and what do I do from there? So I think the first thing to do is decide on what do you want to be close to. So the thing that's a commonality is all these different ways to live in a city are very similar. So a lot of times you can live a certain way in multiple cities, but the bigger question is not do you like Sarasota or Naples, it's like what's the reason of that decision? And I think it covers a couple areas, and so it's really like what do you want to be close to? So if you want to live in Riverview or Carrollwood or Wesley Chapel, then you're trying to get close to the Tampa Bay area, right? So where are the beaches in Tampa? Like where's downtown? Where are you going to work? If you're comparing St. Pete versus Sarasota, those are two completely different towns, because when you leave your house, where do you go? That's way more related to the decision. Like what do you like stylistically? Is it downtown Sarasota? Is it the beaches in Sarasota? Is it Naples? Is it Fort Myers? Is it what you're trying to do is in each of those cities you're trying to get to something similar. And then also you have proximity of the surrounding cities, right? So if you go to like Naples, right, you're way closer to the Keys with the ferry, and you're closer to West Palm and Miami and Jacksonville innately. So that could be a deciding factor as well. But that 100% has to be decided before even thinking about stressing about anything below that. And then from there, you're like, okay, I pick Sarasota. I love the Lido Beach and Siesta Key and downtown Sarasota, the style. Then it's like, then you can break down where to go from there. And one of the suburban version of Sarasota would be Lakewood Ranch, or Sky Ranch, like South Sarasota, Palmer Ranch, the suburbs of Venice. It could be Palmetto, it could be Parish. All right, there's tons of options. So then you take that same thing and you're like, well, I actually like Tampa better. Then you have Riverview, you have Carrollwood, you have Brandon, Fishhawk, Tampa Palms, Wesley Chapel. So it's just it's the same idea. You're going typically to get suburban housing, you're going north, south, east, in most cases east, because that's where land is. In some cases like Tampa is super inland. You also have a western version like West Chase and Carrollwood, where you're not to the beach yet, but it's still suburban. And then Naples would be the same way, right? So you're gonna have it's the same conversation, just offshoots of an area. And that's why we push it down at a macro level first. I think if you're taking like a 3-day trip and you're between two cities in separate counties, then that's the dividing line of you gotta go macro and then go insular from there. So I think that is the most helpful way to start at the top level. All right, let's go to question number 2.
Okay. What do you do if you're moving across the country and you have another house to liquidate?
So this comes up a lot too, as far as like, this is one of the things people stress about before they pick the area, is that I think you got a couple options. And I think if you're smart with the timeline, again, the game plan and deciding on how to go about it is very important, because logistically there's a lot of ways to go. So let's say scenario number 1 would be you're building a house, right? That's very common in kind of my ecosystem. It's very alluring from out of state to build because resales are really hard to shop. Typically they're kind of a secondary thing based on you gaining more knowledge. But say you're going to build and sell. So they're like, in a current market, right? You're going to come in, decide where you want to be. It might take you 2 months to actually get a contract if you're building in the current market, and then you get that contract, and then you say you got 12 months, right? Well, the minute that you get that, the minute you kind of have an idea of like within a 60-day time frame of what you're going to do, it opens up a lot of options, right? So say in one scenario, you're like, my market's super hot, like the suburbs of Chicago, great example, right? Super hot right now, a lot of people moving out of the city. A lot of those folks don't necessarily know if it's going to be the similar level of heat next year, right? So you might want to cut and run, liquidate as high as you can, but you're going to create an interim issue of where do you go from there. But so a couple things you can do is you can either sell, you can rent, you can do all these things, right? But you also have the option of maybe staying in your own house for 7 months, not paying rent to anyone, and then selling next year. So you're kind of weighing that. So I think that is the liquidation of a house with the build. Basically, the synopsis is that you don't need to do a lot until the end. So if you're liquid enough, which I'll talk about here in a few, but if you're liquid enough to put a deposit down, the financing and the owning 2 houses at one thing does not come into play until later in the process, right? So if it's a 12-month build, you really don't need to have, say you can't afford 2 houses at once mortgage-wise, then you don't really need to be clear until 60 days in advance, as long as you can put down the initial deposit for them to build the house. In the other scenario of resale and sell, of I need to liquidate a house in order to buy another one, but this time frame is way more pinched. A lot of times, like a cash deal, a lot of these people are moving in 2 to 3 weeks later. So one thing you can do there, say it's just the more clunky scenario of just, I guess, traditional scenario, is that I'm going to buy a resale house and then I need to sell another house in order to actually be able to move into that house and get a financing deal. But in this market, everybody's in a frenzy and you're trying to rush. So the one thing I would say there is what you can do is if your house needs to be way more ready to sell, preferably already on the market. But what you can't do in the current market is you can't make an offer on a house right now, in most cases, on contingency. So you want the seller, in essence, to not have any idea you have 2 houses. Anything fragile, you already have a mortgage versus cash, so anything fragile, it goes away, right? They're not even gonna accept that offer. So what I like to do is just be really smart about the time frame, being respectful but smart. You can filibuster the timeline, you can do longer close times, all this kind of stuff contractually, and basically you get a house under contract, try to sell your house as quick as possible. You really want to have a good idea that it's going to sell. You want to be very confident about it if it's not already pending, because what you don't want to do is what a lot of people will do is they'll string along a seller, because that seller's in a real bad spot. If they take you on and then 3 weeks later you pull out because you couldn't sell, you do have the ability in a lot of contracts because of the financing contingency, but you don't want to start that way. So I would say a good way to do it is just be really smart about the time frame. If your house is really ready, then just try to get, a lot of people let you do a 45-day, 60-day close. Maybe talk to the seller up front about it. But what you can't bring into play is the sale of your house contingent on buying the new one. So I think, again, all runs back to game plan, right? Yeah, a lot of this stuff, if it's vetted out, smart up front, you can be efficient about the way you go about it, and it'll take a lot of stress out of the game. All right, I think that's enough on that one. Let's go to number 3.
Okay. How do I find an interim option if I'm building a house that's going to take 12 months, or if I've sold my house and haven't found another home yet?
So rentals have been a nightmare, and it's about as fun to find a rental right now as it is to buy. If anyone's tried it, completely see what I'm getting at here, but this one is just a hot button. So I thought I'd just at least broach it. The problem with a lot of people coming from out of state to Florida is a lot of markets that are not Florida, especially in the Northeast or even California. Rentals, real estate agents are really heavily involved in rentals. It's a big renting market. Like when you're in bigger cities, you have a lot of rental markets that realtors are incentivized to be in, and it's a big part of the game. Florida is not that case. So realtors are almost non-existent in rentals. They're very low incentivized, and everyone is in sales because of that reason. So because of that, a lot of it's just people to people as far as the rental goes. I mean, there's property management too. A lot of that surrounds more vacation-centered rentals or big portfolios. But just renting a random single family in Lakewood Ranch, a lot of times it's owner to the renter. So because of that, The first thing is Zillow is definitely king. Zillow is 100% the best resource for rentals in my mind because it's all the people renting themselves. Zillow has a really nice rental manager product. I rent both of my houses off of Zillow. It does background checks and everything for you, so it's just easy for an owner basically. So Zillow's going to have all of it. Zillow's going to have the stuff that's on MLS that happens to be with realtors. It's going to have the people. It's going to have the property management companies like Imitation Homes and stuff. The big portfolio companies are also on Zillow. That's your best place to narrow. And then beyond that, I would just be really flexible. If you're like, I'm going to liquidate my house, I'll deal with it later. I want to get the cash, have it secure, and then I'm going to figure out rental. A couple things you can do is I get it's awesome to come down to Florida in advance, live the lifestyle until your house is ready to be built, but don't discount necessarily renting in your own market. That's something I would really consider because a lot of times, like if you're in Wisconsin, Ohio, or something, even if it's a hot market, you're probably not dealing with as much as what we're doing with here potentially. So I would say you might have better availability to rent because one, you know people, but two, it might not be as hot as a rental market is here because people are coming down usually versus up. Consider that, waiting it out at your current house, but you still get the liquidation gains. I would also open your radius up if you're coming to Florida. So if you're buying in Lakewood Ranch or you're buying in North Tampa or whatever, like you can rent a lot of places you don't have to necessarily live, especially if you don't have kids in the school district. And a lot of times you might be able to get access to those schools because you do have a signed contract in the district. But consider like renting in Venice, even if you're living in Lakewood Ranch. Northport, Port Charlotte. Even if it's annoying for a little bit, it's not you're going to be your permanent home. So definitely be more flexible on your radius. I'd also consider apartments. If you don't have a lot of pets, it's just two of you, there's some great places to rent. Like you could build inside Waterside and Lakewood Ranch, and you can rent. There's two different, the Adley and the Botanica are both luxury apartments there. A lot of apartments let you do 7-month leases, and apartments are also just easy. It's B2B. It's your deposit. It's easy, right? So if you need to grab something quick, a lot of times apartments have readily available options. Even if you desire a single family, if you have the ability to rent an apartment, it would up your timeline. Kind of more creative options is consider maybe hopping 2 separate vacation rentals, like shorter term, 3 to 4 months, and hopping to a different one if your stuff's in storage and you get furnished units. That could be a cool way to stay at the beach while you're here and stuff that you might not want to actually permanently be in, stay on Longboat Key or something like that. And yeah, that pretty much sums it up. I think I mentioned rent where you live, but yeah, so again, just be flexible. Rentals are annoying. Understand your realtor may not be able to help you more than actually just kind of facilitating, because like if you ask me, I'm making the same calls you're making. So a lot of times you can appeal to the heartstrings of the person actually renting it or something like that. But again, flexibility is key. Also consider you already have a house. If you can live in that, that's why I said delaying your current house sale. It was related to the rental piece. But yeah, that's kind of my nutshell there. All right, so number 4.
How much money will I need to fund the move?
Okay, so when we talk about cash, I think I've talked around this a little bit, but basically cash to move related to the purchase of a new house. If you build, in most cases, if it's not custom, you're going to need 10 to about 22-ish%. So what the 10% scenario, what you're basically doing is at contract, and I've talked about this in the past, but at contract, your contract price for your home, say like Neil Homes in Windward calls you today and says, got a contract, right? So what they're going to take is they're going to take all of your structural options, they're going to take the base price of the house, and they're going to take the lot premium on the lot. So it's everything but design. That includes your pool, everything. Just the structural piece, the permit related. Take that whole price, say it's $800,000. They're going to say it's 10% of that. A lot of times they might do like a $10,000 hold and then the rest within 2 weeks, but what they're running up to is the total deposit. So it's 10% of what they know to start the build, which is all going to be related to permit because they have to know that immediately so they could get in permitting. And then after that step, then they're on delays right now, but maybe 45 to 60 days, you'll come in and do your design appointment. That's all aesthetic stuff, countertops, kitchen cabinets, floors, that kind of thing. When you do that, then typically they take another 20 to 25% of just your design options. So even if you went like $100,000, they're taking 20 to 25% of that. You write a check on the spot. So that's your kind of all in. That's why I hover between like 10 and 22, because it might be like aggregated percentages, but usually it ends up there. And the 20 to the 22 usually it would be someone like Pulte, Taylor Morrison. They're right now taking about 20%, where Neil would take 10. So you need a significant amount of liquidity just to start. This is unrelated to mortgages, none of that kind of stuff. They want to know that you can get your financing or how you're going to do it. but they're not actually technically approving you because interest rates aren't relevant, timing's not relevant. But it's not like it's if you're doing a 5% mortgage, it's not like it's 5% and you can build. It's the deposits are standalone. So if you're building that, it's that plus closing costs, which closing is usually a couple points. And then this stuff's somewhat of an exact science. So there's fee sheets and everything like this. Typically with a build, buyers pay, kind of, they brunt a little bit more as far as title expenses and stuff, but it's not super different than a regular sale. A regular sale, you're basically just very normal, right? So you're hovering on down payment, 5 to 20, 25%, whatever you're doing, plus the closing costs, right? So again, a couple points there. And then the rental, just renting in general, typically most people are doing security deposit. They're doing first and last month's rent. So if you said like I'm gonna build and rent, you're gonna need basically that plus like a little bit extra for the rental. So, but the biggest question is probably related to builds, and that's what they're doing at. So if you can typically, like if you called me, right, like everything but design almost to the penny, barring any price increases, but you can have a pretty good idea. It's not a guessing game. It appears vague. It's not vague. But when you win, you got to be ready. So so you want to basically have that knowledge in advance, in my opinion. Okay, let's move. We got 3 more, so let's move on to number 5.
Okay. Is it better to do a new construction build since people are overcharging for resales?
So I've heard this a lot. So in this weird market, people are definitely getting a lot for resales. But again, questions like this, I think the best approach to take is think about that same macro conversation. So it's never new construction versus resale, really. I mean, timelines and stuff, all of these things are offshoots of what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to move to the area, then you need to macro down where y'all want to be, narrow it down, and then when you're like, okay, very specific, even zip code specific, you want to be like, okay, what are all the ways to buy? That's the only way to make the educated decision. Building has no context unless it's related to resale. Resale is no context the other way. So if I was building in Northeast Lakewood Ranch or South Venice, then because the whole time you were kind of like pushing your way down, once you narrow, then you're like, okay, there's 3 builders in here, and then I'm also going to look at resales in parallel. You need, in order to make an educated decision either way, and a lot of people buy resales when they know so much about new construction that they hopped off a wait list, you need to do all these things in parallel. So a perfect example is like you're at Esplanade Azario. If you're familiar with Lakewood Ranch, it's the Taylor Morrison community, and you're waiting for 3 months, right? A lottery bid comes out, and you bid at it, and you lose. But you know when you were bidding how much you would have been at if you won, total package. And then a resale comes up in the Esplanade right next to it, who's fully mature. Very similar models. You know so much about what you would have been at. You spend $100K over what the resale came out at, and you're still under what you would have been at. Granted, it's brand new, but you're weighing that kind of scenario, and you're also in there in 3 weeks. So that's a perfect example of you would have not known enough information to overpay at the other one unless you knew what you would have been at. So a lot of this opportunity cost, and a lot of it's just like, it's not being romantic about it really. It's just like, you need to know, like if you have $1.8 million, right, there's a lot more ways to buy than 1.1. You need, in my opinion, you need to know the entire landscape around Sarasota, outside of it, all over the place, in order to even get to have enough information to make a correct decision, or at least me to feel like I'm mitigating risk. So I think that's probably the proper way to look at it. It's never versus, it's all of it. And then it's what would you prefer in a perfect world if all is equal, but usually all is not equal. So I think that's the best approach. Okay, 2 more.
Okay. What do we do with all of our stuff when we move?
So this is kind of more of like the semantics of it, but still one of the more annoying parts. So I would say cross country, depending on what you're doing with the rental and the in-between, again, and not a lot of incentive to maybe don't move right away from your current house as this double move thing. But I think, pods and pack rat and these like store while they move things are always interesting. I mean, I think they're usually at a premium, but it's not a bad idea to like put all your stuff in there, go get a furnished rental, have them move it across the country, and then have them keep it, and then literally drop the pod in your driveway when you're ready. And then you can just hire movers to take it all out. You can move and do regular storage facility as well. So cross country mover, like when you get to like the amount of like New York to Florida or California or Seattle to Florida, you need guys that's all they do. You need like the guys that efficient. They have truck routes. Transportation is extremely expensive, as many people are aware of. You need to have, like, they know if they're like kind of backhauling from one location to another. It's just efficiency of transportation. You need that's how they get lower average miles. I would say you need there's only a few freight lines I would like feel comfortable that usually give you in that range. So I would look at something like that if you're going to do bring here and then store. You could do a 12-month unfurnished rental and bring your stuff. If you can get a 12-month term, then a lot of times what's cool is you can get an overlap of like your house is done 2 months before you have to move out of your rental. That gives you a nice, comfortable way to like relocate there. And you can also sell stuff in between. And a lot of people don't like bringing their stuff into fresh construction. And then another option, if you're just like, I'm done with it, talk to your realtor in your local state and see about selling your place furnished. In my opinion, it's kind of like perceived value. A lot of times in most houses, people aren't going to necessarily pay a huge premium for a furnished place. A lot of people even arguably view it as a burden. But what it will do is, if they're willing to accept it, it will let you like leave literally all your stuff, and then you can just itemize, take out certain things, and just don't convey them when you sell. And then also, if you're in like a beach town or something like that, then you could it might be an appeal to people that want to buy it as just an investment thing. Maybe you could position it that way when you sell it. But I think again, so a lot of people have kind of like these lists of like good recommendations for this kind of thing, us included. But I would say that's kind of the route I would take as far as like what I think most people are doing on average. Okay, one more.
Okay. If I'm building a house, what meetings do I need to come to throughout the process?
Okay, so I thought this was a poignant one because what a lot of times is happening is like there's these like, you're like frenzy, and you get something, right? And like this would be building again, but you get something and you're like, oh gosh, I got it, and then you're like, what happens next? So like you have 10 to 12 months of like, I already got it, and it feels like you accomplished it by signing the contract. It's a rather long process. There's a lot of abyss. There's a lot of like nothing needs to happen, right? But you kind of are tracking this thing the whole time. So building's actually somewhat pleasant, right? The builders are, and even when I get busy, I'm not great about this either, but the builders are. They're a lot of times like they treat it like there's nothing to do at certain stages, right? So you could go 3 months and you're like, well, what am I doing? A lot of times they don't communicate that. So really, as far as the way I would go about it is when you sign that contract and you pay your deposit, the first major milestone is typically the design session, and that's like what people are excited about and that kind of thing. So the design session typically happens 45 to 60 days after, and that's where like you're gonna give them the final like oomph of like what what money's due, but also what the house is gonna be. That one it's typically schedules pretty quickly after they get everything signed, and that one also like what I like to do is just there's definitely ways to go about that better than other ways. Like people that have built like 4 times could definitely tell you like first versus the fourth. It's a long day. They typically what they'll do is like if you have a pool and you have an interior design of the house, they'll separate that on 2 days because the pool you have like an allowance, right? That's structural. They want to know like, am I doing a pool? Am I doing a hot tub? That's it. And then you have like an allotment just so they can determine a deposit. But then you have a design session with the pool too, because you can do like landings and you can do like creative stairs and water features and all this kind of stuff. So they separate that with the pool company and the design center. But typically like that day is pretty awful if you don't go about it the right way. So I think there's ways to mitigate that, like focusing on the stuff early in the day that's important, because every grout line, all that stuff they go in. Are you going to epoxy the garage floor? Do you want pool downstairs for the the attic? Like the stuff that you would be better off dealing with at 4 p.m. after you did the stuff you care about. But I would probably attack like floors, kitchen, outdoor, master, bath, and then you want to definitely like prioritize, right? So that's what I try to do is prepare people, so it's not a bad idea to like have some real thought on that. And then also eating too much on design probably here, but also what I would do is like people I think underestimate how much this isn't Property Brothers, right? So they do it on purpose. Like you don't go into that design center and then they give you renderings and like, oh, it's gonna look just like this. None of that, right? They literally lay like a tile. They're like this tile next to this backsplash. Like they lay the stuff and they're like, that's your kitchen, right? This is your counter, and the little samples. And you get in there a lot of times, you're like, oh, that quartz looks yellow. Is it just the lighting in here? It's that kind of thing. So if there's any way like you bring you found a kitchen on Pinterest that you love that style for, I would bring as much as you can and then be like, I want to replicate as close as what's your version of this. That helps a lot because you can underestimate like how much is involved in piecing a room together. So anyway, so that's kind of the first major milestone. And then other than that, there's like major elements like that matter. Like they lay the slab owner doesn't matter that much for that. They do pre-drywall. That might be something that would be relevant because it's the only time you can see behind the walls. If you want to take pictures and you want, like, if you're going to hang stuff later and you want to know where the electrical is and stuff like that, it's not a bad idea. But anyway, there's a few major milestones, and what you can do is, like, you do the design, and you could have like we basically would do all of it, none of it, somewhere in between. So you can do design, you can never come back and have a proxy that will do it on your behalf. And show you videos and that kind of thing, or you could have the project manager if you trust them, or you could just come back for like a couple meetings, like pre-drywall, maybe come for the punch out, which happens like a week before you close, where that they mark every nick and every ding and everything like that, and maybe come just for the final walk around. So anyway, so there's a schedule, and you're running into a certain date, and things appear very random as far as they're just doing them when they can if there's backlogs in other areas. But that's basically the best way to treat it. If you have an idea of like kind of what they're doing, you're checking in on them. But just know that house builds usually don't take 12 months if all was equal. It's a lot of waiting, a lot of inspections, and that can be very stressful because it feels like you're forgotten about all the time. But that's kind of the way I would go about it, is just kind of work your way back from a schedule, and the realtor can definitely help with that. So, okay, so I think that wraps it. So I hope that helps. I know it's a lot of talking, but this is kind of a riff style, but it was kind of fresh in my mind about this is an insane time, and it's even more stressful for you're out of state. And I do have a lot of information that's asked and a lot of similar questions, and if knowing just this stuff really well answers like a lot of it at one time. So I'm trying to compile that and add as much information as I can, add as much value as I can. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you guys so much for watching podcast episode number 2. Please reach out to me. We'll drop the information here. If you have any questions, you need anything from us. And thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.